Stephen Goodell, KOR Sports are here with the legendary Al Bernstien. Thank you, sir, for the time, brother. Appreciate it always.
Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, we got a good one, a really, really good one. You know, kind of going around press row. You and I were just kind of talking to other media members, and everyone says it's a close fight. It's. I feel like people tend to lean towards Benavidez, at least from the people I've spoken to, but that's kind of more based on experience. You know, I mean, Morell only has 11 fights, right? But you know, this is kind of a different time, right? We've seen Lomachenko in his second fight for a title, right? Like on his third fight, win a title. Right. You know, like these guys who have lower numbers on their record doesn't necessarily mean they're inexperienced in the way that maybe they used to be, right? Just
right. It has changed to some degree now, and however, in this instance, and I think that makes Morell very eligible to be in this fight. And it makes it appropriate for him to be in this fight. The question is going to be whether it's enough for him to win this fight. And we're going to find that out. You know, this is kind of his coming out party, and he's having a chance to show that he can beat an elite fighter. He hasn't faced one yet. Benavidez has had more experience. He's fought tougher competition. He's had a world championship, twice lost it because of his own issues. Which makes it even more anxious for him to get a big win here for a chance to win the unified title, he hopes. But we're left with more questions about Morell, I think, than we are about Benavidez, and that's probably the reason why more people are kind of leading to Benavidez.
You know, what does a Morell victory look like in the ring? What does a Benavidez victory look like in the ring?
I think a Morell victory looks like somebody that can use his legs during portions of this fight, but not the whole fight, which we've seen a little bit of in the past, in recent past, who can go in the pocket and try to land big shots and maybe counter some of the shots from Benavidez, which is very hard to do because Benavidez throws so many, but do it in spots where he feels comfortable doing it, and then maybe show a little bit of lateral movement. It can't be him doing lateral movement the whole time, and I don't think it can be him standing in the pocket the whole time. But he might surprise us with that, though, because he does have power, but his knockout one-punch power has been diminished as he's fought better fighters. So I think that's what a Morell win looks like, a guy that mixes it up by being in the pocket and landing important shots, and then doing a little more lateral movement to keep Benavidez confused and also mute his volume a little bit, as Caleb Plant was able to do to some degree in the early rounds of that fight. And for David Benavidez, a victory looks like all David Benavidez wins, and that is combination punching, a lot of volume, ultimately figuring out the Rubik's Cube of whatever's in front of him. And once he figures it out, once he starts throwing those combinations, if he doesn't knock you out, he's going to wear you down and start dominating round after round.
Right. Man, this is why we fight the fights, right? So we can see how it's actually going to work out. You know, another one that it's kind of interesting that we're here, but you know, Canelo. Obviously, these are maybe the top two guys kind of near and around his division, other than Bivol and Beterbiev, right? Who are obviously we're all at light heavyweight now, but. You know, it looks like Canelo's looking at Terrence Crawford. You know, Terrence Crawford did struggle a little bit at 54 against a very kind of tricky, guy in Israel Madrimov, a great fighter, really, in Israel Madrimov. But, you know, didn't have, like, obviously his knockout streak ended with that fight, right? Because he had a long knockout streak prior to that. And now we're asking this man to go up, 14 more pounds, 2 more divisions to fight, one of the top, at least 3, maybe top 5 pound for pound guys, who doesn't look like he's slipping too much. I mean, people say that Canelo kind of slows down a little bit, which maybe he does, but it's also, maybe he doesn't want to go for the finish, right? He's already kind of won the fight. So I don't know, like, stylistically, what does Crawford have to do, and can he kind of overcome those 14 pounds and get a victory over Canelo?
Well, when you think of Terrence Crawford, I mean, if you're thinking he started at 135 as a professional, 168's a big way up from there. That's a lot of weight to go up. And one of the things that's heartening to him is when we see the two together, while Canelo is much denser and a stronger man, Crawford doesn't look like the smaller person. He's got some height and reach, and let's face it, the way he wants to win this fight is not by being on the inside battling in the trenches with Canelo. It's by being not necessarily moving around the ring all the time, which Crawford doesn't do anyway, but it's being at distance and landing combinations, controlling the distance. So a victory for Crawford is going to look like Canelo Alvarez, who can have lulls in his fights, right? We know he can give rounds away, and he frequently does. And then we know Canelo sometimes fades a little bit later in fights. Sometimes he fades later in fights, not just like in a Bivol fight where he's been punished a little bit, but even in fights that he's doing fairly well in, but all of a sudden he'll slow down a little bit. And now he's the older version, and as you point out, there's been some diminution in his overall ability and competitive, ability to win fights. But so Crawford has to bank rounds. Now, to bank rounds against Canelo, who, for whatever reason, however we want to look at him in terms of how hard it is to bank rounds against him, we can come up with all the reasons why we think that's so. If you're going to bank rounds against him, you better throw enough punches to do it. And Terence Crawford is not a volume puncher so much. He's going to have to up the level of punches that he throws, I think, and lands. And then his mission is to bank rounds, and at the end of the day, probably win a decision. I mean, Canelo Alvarez has a monster big chin, and it's unlikely Crawford will hurt him.
It's interesting that that's the big fight that's happening, right? There's a fire alarm. Hopefully we're okay. Because obviously David Benavidez has, I feel like, been the guy for a couple years now that we've kind of, all of us here in the media room kind of clamored for Canelo to face. With a victory against Morell on Saturday, does he still maybe get a pass for not fighting Benavidez? I mean, he already has a Hall of Fame career for sure. Yeah. But at this is boxing not, or almost all sports, right? Like if the Kansas City Chiefs, decided not to face, what I mean, like the Philadelphia Eagles, people would be like, you can't hold on to it forever.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing with boxing. Unlike other sports, it doesn't come down, you're mandated to face people. With Canelo, his resume is obviously filled with great fighters. He's fought very tough matchups. But let's face it, this is a fight that I think by his fight with Benavidez, by any fair evaluation, he has been the one that has mostly avoided that fight, not Benavidez. It is probably not something that tarnishes his total legacy. It's not going to happen, and that's not even fair. But it certainly is something that boxing fans and maybe historians will look at and say, that was a shame. And shame on him for avoiding that fight, because it was a fight fans wanted. It would have been a fascinating fight to look at, and it would have been very good.
Man, obviously we got a huge card, February 22nd. Just what's Al Bernstien's favorite fight on that card? Because there's a few.
Well, that could be one of the best cards of all time, maybe the best card of all time. And of course, I love the main event. I love Adames and Shiraz.
Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic fight. I love Dubois and Parker. I think that's a very intriguing fight. Joseph Parker's a guy that rises to the occasion. He's a very, very clever fighter. And Madrimov and Ortiz, another one that, you can go right down that list. And almost any of those fights, there's really only one fight on there with a prohibitive favorite, and that's Stevenson against Floyd Schofield. Floyd Schofield's a good fighter. He could provide a competitive and good fight against Chris Stevenson. But there's so many down below. Those several that I mentioned are a perfect example. And it's just, it's an astonishing card.
Mm-hmm. I'm actually quite surprised that I thought Dubois might get the Israel Madrimov bronchitis a little bit, because he clearly is the guy, I feel like, for Usyk, right? I mean,
probably likely.
Usyk did drop him with that kind of borderline shot. Obviously called like a low blow, but
Now Usyk was, dominating. So before that and after, but still, but right. If you look at it and you think that that punch was perfectly legal, and it provides certainly enough drama for them to have a rematch, and it's appropriate. Right, but apparently he is going to fight Joe Parker. And Joe Parker, of course, listen, he's a very good fighter. Joe Parker is a good B to B plus level fighter. And so, yes, there's danger there, but he's not fighting an A-level fighter, but he's fighting a really good fighter. So, yes, you're right. You could see the point where, he might get bronchitis, as you put it, that maybe could keep you out of a fight. But, well, to this point he hasn't, and we're getting pretty close to the fight. So right, I'm thinking maybe
might
not.
be in the clear.
we might be safe on that one.
Who's Al Bernstein's top 3 pound for pound, and kind of why do you have them, or do you not do? Are you not a pound for pound guy?
I am not a pound for pound guy. I am. It's funny. You've hit on the topic that is a flashpoint for me, and I understand why people do it. I totally get it. I understand the charm of it. There's never been an exercise that I ever got into, because they can't fight each other for the most part. We're judging them against different competition. I'm perfectly happy to engage in a conversation of who's the best in a division. You know, if somebody wants to talk to me about that, I'm not big at ranking people to begin with anyway, but that I'll do. But the pound for pound, I just think it's so vague that it's hard to tell. I mean, if you ask me who are some of the best fighters in boxing, yeah, I mean, the Crawfords, the Canelos, the Inoues, Usyks and Bivols, Beterbiev, those guys. I mean, I can name you 10 fighters that, if you ask me, are they fantastic fighters? I'm going to say absolutely. And are they among the best in boxing? 100%. But for some reason, I eschew ranking them.
Right. That's good. It's a way to avoid some drama in these rooms too, for sure.
I got enough trouble.
Right. Just kind of last one, I want to get your take on the rematch. We just said, February 22nd, Bivol, Beterbiev. A lot of people thought Bivol won that first fight. Beterbiev did seem to hurt Bivol maybe a little more than the other way around, right?
Right.
It's very close.
Yeah, you can make a case for Bivol winning that fight, a good case. I mean, that's one of those fights that it could have flipped either way. I might have even leaned a little bit toward Bivol winning it, but I don't remember exactly, and so I have no issue with Beterbiev winning. That fight was, while it was more strategic than maybe some people thought. There were good moments of action, and there were a lot of things that happened. And you're right, Beterbiev maybe showed a little bit more power, which isn't shocking. But if there was ever a fight that I said, yeah, I want to see a rematch, this is the one, because I don't think either man was able to fully implement what they wanted to do. They got close. So I'm curious to see, and because it was truly a razor-thin fight, I want to see, okay, who can implement what they do best to the point of showing us, even by a 2 or 3 point margin, that they're the better man in this fight. And I think that's kind of what that next fight is about. And they're both fantastic fighters. I mean, really, really, really good. And I have to say this: how amazing is it that Beterbiev at age 38 can still fight like he's fighting, I mean, there have been 38 years old that have done it, and Crawford's 37, of course, but I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. I got to give him props for that, however all this turns out, it's like, okay, that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, they took something from B-Hop a little bit, huh? They took something like preservation from...
It goes all the way back to Archie Moore, who didn't win the light heavyweight title until he was like 39 years old, which is crazy, and then kept it for like 8 years, which is even more insane.
And Archie Moore was fighting like twice a month and stuff. He was still at that time.
Yeah, right. That's another point. On top of that, he's fighting a minimum of 5 times a year.
Right, something crazy like that. Man, Al, it's always a pleasure, man, to talk to you. Tell the fans, but you were telling me about your YouTube and just where they can follow you. And
they can. They can see me on the Salida Promotions YouTube channel with my Big Time Boxing show. They can also see me on a regular basis, and I'll be back in action in March on DAZN doing the Big Time Boxing USA cards on there. They don't have a specific date yet for March, but there will be a fight coming in March. and I'll be doing those as I have been. And as I said, they can see me on YouTube. I have a lot of fun guests and offer my insights, and they can follow me at Bernstien on Twitter, so they can get to me.
I got to say, it's kind of neat being in the same room with you and Jim Lampley. You know, I know that. How many times did you guys end up working together? Like twice or once? The one time the Mayweather Pacquiao?
Technically twice. We were in a movie together.
Oh,
I forget the movie. It was not a very great movie, but we were that, you know. There was a scene of us like leading up to a fight or something, but the only time we ever worked ringside was for the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight, because HBO and Showtime collaborated on that fight, and I did it with him and Roy Jones Jr. So that was only one time, which is fascinating, because that's really neat. You know, you would have thought by accident. And the thing is, I mean, especially in my case, I don't know if it's so much with Jim, but at the end of the day, I've worked with literally almost everybody, real close to almost everybody at one point or another, but Jim and I only one time.
That's pretty neat, man. That's pretty neat. Al, pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Very